Right now, two-thirds of adults are walking around with a secret that they are honestly absolutely terrified to tell their own families.
Yeah, it's a very heavy secret.
Right. It's the specific details of how they want the end of their lives to unfold. And we kind of exist in this paradox right now.
How do you mean?
Well, on one hand, we have a booming legacy preservation industry. I mean, we've got digital vaults, AI voice twins, highly sophisticated legal advance directives. The infrastructure to capture a person's plans is literally better than at any point in human history.
Oh, absolutely. The tech is incredible.
It is. Yet, despite all that, only 37% of adults actually have their end-of-life wishes documented.
Just 37%. Because, we have built these incredible systems to record a life, but we have completely ignored the profound emotional capacity required to actually face its end.
Exactly. And today, we are exploring a fundamental question regarding this exact dilemma. When embarking on end-of-life readiness, what is the necessary first step? Now, I argue that we must prioritize securing the legal paperwork and the advance directives.
Which is the traditional view.
Yes, because documented, legally binding plans are the only things that definitively protect a person's wishes against the clinical machinery of the medical system.
And I approach this from a fundamentally different angle. I argue that beginning with emotional processing, specifically utilizing a behavioral framework known as the dying golden approach, is absolutely essential.
So feelings first, essentially.
Right. Because if we do not start with that emotional infrastructure, the legal paperwork is ultimately avoided. It's abandoned or, never even started in the first place.
Well, I want to lay out the pragmatism of my position right at the top here. The medical and legal industries rightly focus on execution. I mean, getting advance directives signed, completing hospice intake, designating a healthcare proxy.
The logistics.
The logistics, yes. These documents are the ultimate safety net. Capturing the plan must be the primary goal because, frankly, the clock is always ticking.
It is, yeah.
I am not suggesting emotional readiness isn't a beautiful ideal. It is. But feelings can be processed after the medical and legal protections are securely in place. I mean, without the paperwork, an individual is left entirely to the mercy of default outcomes. The state, the hospital, or, well-meaning but guessing relatives. No amount of internal peace changes the legal reality of an ICU.
Well, that is a highly rational, very standard way to look at the problem. I hear that a lot. But I'd argue it fundamentally misunderstands human behavior and evolutionary biology, really.
Okay, how so?
In the Dying Golden framework, there's a concept referred to as the body planned, the woman unprepared. The traditional view you were advocating for assumes that if you just, put a sterile logical form in front of someone, their cognitive reasoning kicks in, right?
Right. They see the value and do it.
Exactly. They realize it's good for them, and they fill it out. But paperwork without emotional readiness simply does not get done. I mean, the real barrier isn't a lack of access to legal forms, and it isn't a lack of organizational skills.
Then what is it?
It is the unaddressed primal terror of dying. The first step must be emotional readiness building, mental strength through specific psychological tools before a pen is ever lifted.
See, let me challenge this idea of primal terror being the primary roadblock, because I think we might be mystifying a logistical issue. Let's look at why people actually procrastinate.
Okay.
I posit that the root cause of this planning gap is largely a lack of streamlined access, compounded by incredibly dense bureaucratic language. Think of it like filing a highly complex tax return.
A tax return?
Yeah, people avoid their taxes until the last minute, not because they are paralyzed by an existential fear of the IRS, but because the paperwork is tedious, right? It's confusing and cognitively taxing. When you look at living wills and DNR orders, you are asking a layperson to navigate medical jargon.
Sure, the jargon is bad, but
It is a user experience problem. If we simplify the execution happens.
I have to completely disagree with that premise. I mean, the tax return analogy falls apart the moment you look at human motivation.
How does it fall apart? They're both dense paperwork.
Because if a complex tax return promises a massive financial refund, people figure out how to fill it out. We navigate incredibly dense, jargon-heavy mortgage documents when we want the house.
That's a fair point, yeah.
We sign terrifying medical waivers when we want the life-saving surgery. The fundamental difference here is that nobody inherently wants the outcome being discussed in an advance directive. The barrier is not tedium. The barrier is terror.
I think we need to be careful with the word terror, though. It suggests a level of clinical panic that doesn't accurately describe the quiet avoidance most families engage in.
But the avoidance is just a symptom of the terror. The behavioral psychology here is rooted in terror management theory.
Right. The idea that we suppress mortality awareness to function.
Exactly. Evolutionary psychology tells us that human beings are uniquely burdened with the cognitive awareness of our own mortality. So to function in daily life, we have to aggressively suppress that awareness. Our silence around dying is a deeply wired survival strategy.
Avoidance as survival.
Yes. And avoidance works brilliantly, right up until it doesn't. Just look at the data. 71% of Americans say they prefer to die at home.
Yep.
Yet only 41% expect that they actually will. That is a massive 30-point gap between the wish and the expectation.
That is a huge disconnect.
And why does that gap exist? Because 69% of people say society avoids the subject of death entirely. The ultimate result is that 2 out of 3 people are carrying these decisions silently. That is not a paperwork problem, and it certainly isn't a user experience problem. That is an amygdala problem.
Okay, let's drill down into the biology of that, because the amygdala is the brain's threat detection center, right?
Yep.
You are arguing that looking at a legal form about end-of-life care triggers a severe threat response, causing the person to flee the task.
Precisely. Flight response.
I understand the mechanism of fight or flight, but if the fear is truly that primal and biological, how does this dying golden approach claim to bypass it? I mean, surely asking someone to engage in deep emotional processing about their own death would trigger the amygdala just as much, if not more, than a sterile legal document with checkboxes.
And that is exactly why the golden method tools are sequenced very specifically. You cannot just force someone into a deep, vulnerable conversation out of nowhere.
Right, that would be overwhelming.
It would absolutely trigger the threat response. Instead, they start by tackling the physiological reaction directly, before the fear can even be spoken aloud. This begins with a tool called the mud room.
Okay, wait, we need to clarify what that actually is in practice, because the mud room sounds like a physical space in a clinic. Are we talking about a literal environment?
No. It is a psychological boundary and a specific silent practice. Think of a physical mud room in a house. It's the transitional space where you take off your muddy boots before you track dirt all over the living room.
Ah, got it.
Psychologically, the mudroom is a structured, solitary practice designed for meeting the fear in silence. It is used when the dread feels too large to even articulate. You cannot calm fear down by refusing to look at it, but you also can't force someone to immediately analyze it verbally. So you begin with a bounded period of silent acknowledgement.
But relying on silent reflection sounds dangerously close to rumination. I mean, if you put someone in a quiet room and ask them to face their mortality without a structured task like filling out a form, you aren't mitigating the amygdala's response. You are potentially feeding it.
If they were just left alone to think, yes.
Right. Left alone with their thoughts, people spiral.
They would spiral if the silence wasn't explicitly paired with a physiological anchor. And that is where the golden breath comes in.
Okay. I assume we are talking about a specific respiration technique to manage heart rate variability.
Precisely. It utilizes the 4-7-8 breath. So inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 7, exhaling for 8.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's very effective. And this isn't just some relaxation metaphor. It is a biological override. When you deliberately extend the exhale longer than the inhale, you are mechanically signaling the vagus nerve.
Which regulates the parasympathetic system.
Exactly. The vagus nerve then communicates to the parasympathetic nervous system that the body is currently safe. This physically lowers the amygdala's reactivity. You have to build the physical infrastructure to tolerate the fear before you ever ask the cognitive brain to pick up a pen and choose a healthcare proxy.
Okay, the physiological mechanism of vagal tone is sound, and I can see that lowering baseline anxiety is beneficial for decision-making. But this brings me to a massive practical concern regarding your timeline.
Go on.
We are talking about bounded silent practices, physiological regulation, and gradual emotional infrastructure. I have a serious concern about pacing here. Don't we risk simply running out of time?
Time is exactly what is at stake.
Which is why the paperwork needs to come first. Let's look at the harsh reality of modern medicine. The data shows that the median hospice enrollment happens a mere 17 days before death.
Just 17 days?
Yes. The window between a terminal decline and the absolute end is drastically shrinking. Given this incredibly compressed timeline, emphasizing emotional rehearsal feels like a dangerous luxury.
A luxury?
Yes, because if a woman spends her weeks focusing on breathing exercises and solitary reflection, and a catastrophic medical crisis hits on day 5, she has zero legal protection. The state takes over, the hospital defaults to maximum intervention. My focus on rapid execution is driven by the undeniable reality of the clock.
I completely agree with the devastating urgency of that 17-day statistic. It is a failure of our system.
Right.
But I use that exact same urgency to reach the opposite conclusion.
Wait, how so?
At 17-day median hospice enrollment does not happen because people were too busy doing emotional reflection. It happens precisely because the conversation was actively avoided until a crisis forced the issue.
Oh, so you were saying the 17-day window is a symptom of the avoidance, not a reason to rush the legal forms.
Yes. If you try to force the paperwork early without the emotional readiness, people reject the paperwork, they put it in a drawer, they go back to silence, and then, inevitably, they end up in that 17-day crisis window anyway.
Okay, I see your point.
To break this cycle, the Dying Golden View introduces a tool called Golden Conversations. This is the bridge. We move from the internal, silent regulation of the mudroom to actively externalizing the fear out loud.
Externalizing? By rehearsing what exactly? Reading the legal contingencies to each other?
No, by rehearsing the raw human truth before you translate it into legalese. It is the structured practice of saying out loud, I am afraid of dying in pain. I want to be in my own bed. I do not want to be placed in a facility.
Just saying the fears out loud.
Yes, and there is vital neuroscience backing this step. It relies on the psychological concept of affect labeling. Research demonstrates that putting a feared emotional experience into spoken words measurably reduces its physiological grip on the brain.
Ah, naming the emotion dampens the emotion.
Exactly. The dread does not shrink because you managed it quietly. It shrinks because it leaves your body and enters the room.
But, and this is a big but, the environment must be highly controlled for affect labeling to work without causing secondary trauma. I mean, if you tell your family you are afraid of dying, the most common response is a visceral rejection.
Oh, 100%. Families flinch. They say, don't talk like that. You have years left.
Right, they shut it down immediately.
They shut the conversation down because of their own terror management responses. That's why Golden Conversations requires doing this with a trusted witness or within a specific peer circle who is prepared to simply hear it without trying to fix it. Saying it out loud to a non-flinching witness turns a private, paralyzing dread into a purposeful, manageable decision.
I recognize the clinical value of affect labeling. It is a robust psychological principle. But this is where I must push back firmly on the end point of this methodology.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say a person uses the mudroom, regulates their nervous system with the golden breath, and has a beautifully profound golden conversation where they clearly articulate their desire to die at home. I am going to be entirely pragmatic here. A rehearsed conversation does not hold up in court.
No, it does not.
If that person goes into sudden cardiac arrest, the EMTs arriving in the ambulance do not care about the emotional breakthrough they had with their peers. They care if there is a legally binding, signed DNR taped to the refrigerator.
That's true.
If there isn't, they are initiating chest compressions. The emotional work, as profound and regulating as it may be, is entirely hollow if it does not cross the finish line into a legally binding advance directive.
That is why I maintain the traditional view. The document is the only thing with teeth.
And on that specific point, the dying golden view and the traditional medical view are in lockstep. The paperwork is absolutely non-negotiable.
Oh, really? So we agree there.
We completely agree. The divergence in our debate is strictly about how we actually get a terrified human being to complete it. This behavioral approach achieves your necessary legal finish line through a tool called the Golden Declaration Plus.
The Golden Declaration Plus. How does a declaration differ in mechanism from simply filling out the standard advance directive provided by a primary care physician?
It doesn't replace the standard advance directive. It encompasses and expands it. The Golden Declaration Plus is the mechanism that transitions the spoken wish into a documented, holistic plan.
Walk me through that sequence. Sure.
Move 1 was naming the fear silently. Move 2 was the spoken wish by affect labeling. Move 3 is this written decision. It ensures the choice is decided, not defaulted, but it goes far beyond medical checkboxes.
In what way?
Well, standard legacy preservation platforms are entirely focused on the past. Archiving photos, recording family recipes, mapping ancestry. They preserve what a person leaves behind, which is often referred to as the story without the send-off.
Meaning they prepare the history, but they ignore the actual ending of the narrative.
Precisely. The Golden Declaration is a narrative document that pairs with the legal forms. It asks the questions the digital vaults are too afraid to ask, like where do the physical ashes go? The data explicitly mentions choices like wanting to be replanted as a tree.
That's very specific.
It is a profoundly personal, deeply specific choice that a standard hospital form just does not leave room for. It involves choosing who mourns her, who celebrates her, and what the atmosphere of the end actually looks like. Because she has done the emotional heavy lifting first, she is filling out these legal and narrative documents as an act of self-authorship, not as an act of morbid clinical avoidance.
This concept of self-authorship is fascinating, but I have to question the immense weight it places on the individual. I mean, the traditional clinical method, sterile as it may be, actually offloads a massive psychological burden.
Do you think so?
Yes, the hospital has a strict protocol. The funeral home has a standard package. The state has default inheritance laws. By asking a person to emotionally process their own mortality, regulate their nervous system, and explicitly dictate every single term of their ending, are we not asking them to do a monumental amount of psychological heavy lifting at a time when their physical or mental bandwidth might be declining?
It is monumental heavy lifting, yes. It is rigorous mental strength training for the hardest conversation a person will ever have with themselves. But the core premise here is that the burden of silence is vastly heavier than the burden of speaking.
Is it, though?
Absolutely. The traditional method doesn't actually offload the burden. It just forces the person to carry their fear privately, while a hospital executes a clinical protocol upon their body, which is truly heavier. Signing a form handed to you by a stranger in a sterile room while your heart races with unacknowledged terror? Or taking the time to steady your nervous system, looking a friend in the eye, saying exactly what you want, and then documenting it on your own terms.
When you compare the physiological cost of carrying unspoken fear against the effort of the emotional work, the statistics certainly support your view. If 69% of people say society avoids the topic entirely, that means millions of adults are carrying the weight of that taboo alone.
Millions. And that isolation is exactly why the paperwork first approach fails so consistently. 2/3 of people simply refuse to do it. The traditional view insists that the paperwork is the safety net. But if a safety net is designed in a way that terrifies people so much they refuse to jump into it, the net isn't working.
We have to change the way we ask them to jump.
Exactly. And that requires building the emotional infrastructure first, step by step, so that the legal paperwork becomes the final expression of their agency, rather than a surrender to a clinical system.
This brings us to the crux of our disagreement. I began this debate by maintaining that capturing the plan, the advance directive, the legal documentation must be the ultimate priority. I argued that without it, a person's wishes have zero protection against the powerful defaults of the medical and legal systems.
Yes.
I maintain that rapid execution matters more than emotional rehearsal, because the timeline of terminal decline is unforgiving.
And I argued that human beings simply cannot and will not execute logistical tasks that trigger their primal mortality fears without deliberate emotional preparation. I argued that the real barrier wasn't the complexity of the medical forms, but the amygdala's intense threat response, which strictly requires the sequenced emotional tools of the dying golden framework to overcome.
As we synthesize these positions, I find myself firmly maintaining my original endpoint, while recognizing a critical flaw in how we reach it. The ultimate goal unequivocally remains the same: ensuring an individual's end-of-life wishes are explicitly documented, legally binding, and fiercely protected so they avoid default state outcomes.
We are totally aligned there.
However, the traditional industry's approach of merely sliding a clipboard across a desk is empirically insufficient. You cannot engineer a flawless legal document and expect a terrified, biologically defensive human mind to rationally engage with it. The legal shield is vital, but we need a better way to forge it.
And I will fully affirm your position that emotional processing without the final, documented legal paperwork is a job half done, and dangerously so. We cannot just have beautiful, tearful conversations in a circle of peers and leave it at that.
Right, that's not enough.
The signature matters. The legal directive matters. The synthesis here is the marriage of the emotional and the tactical.
The paperwork is the necessary armor, but the behavioral techniques we've explored, the mudroom for unburdening the dread, the golden breath for physiological regulation, golden conversations for leveraging affect labeling, and the golden declaration for transitioning the spoken wish into actionable fact. These provide the vital emotional infrastructure.
They do.
They are the mechanisms that make a person emotionally capable of actually finishing the paperwork.
Exactly. What strikes me most deeply about this intersection is the profound dignity it returns to the individual. We spend so much of our lives reacting to massive impersonal systems, the medical system, the legal system.
It can feel very dehumanizing.
It really can. To treat end-of-life planning not as a clinical, morbid task executed upon you, but as a deliberate act of self-authorship that changes the entire paradigm. It takes an event associated with the absolute loss of control and transforms it into the ultimate exercise in human agency.
It reframes the very nature of how we view the end of our stories. It suggests that deliberately deciding how we leave is just as vital as recording what we accomplished while we were here. We leave it to you, our listeners, to consider the order of operations in your own readiness and how you might face the silence.
Because ultimately, a well-built vault is useless if we do not have the emotional tools to turn the key.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.